Welcome to another edition of CSBJ Radio. I'm your host, Greg Wolfson, the owner and publisher of Connections Small Business Journal. As I often say, you can find us online at www.connectmybusiness.me. Again, www.connectmybusiness.me. Contact with us or connect with us via social media. Simply type in the @ Connect My Biz. That's Connect My Biz. Let me tell you, folks, I am very excited about the guest that's appearing on our podcast today. Mr. Mitchell Levy. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Absolutely excited to be here, and I always like it when the host says they're excited to have me here. So that's a good start.
It's a very good start, and it's a truthful start because I'm very excited about having you on the show today. Mr. Levy,
thanks.
For those that don't know you, if you can, just give us an introduction. You are known as the aha guy. And I love that. And if you could talk to us about that, please.
Sure. You know, when you've been around for a little bit and you've seen some insights, and I'm a strategic thinker, it's easy to help people understand or put things in frameworks. And when you have something that's put into a framework, what that really does for the person on the other side is they have that aha moment, that lightning bulb, the opportunity to understand, oh, wait, that's how things should be. Mm-hmm. And I started doing this for myself as an entrepreneur. Last time I actually worked for a company was 1997. At the time, I was working for Sun Microsystems, and I was running the e-commerce component of Sun Supply Chain. And what happened is it was the e-commerce days. And so I became a management consultant focused on helping companies understand how to integrate the internet and e-commerce into what they're doing. And I guess at the time, and I'll leave you with a funny statement. At the time, I was going around to CEOs and chief marketing officers and even the engineering guys, so VP engineers, and basically saying, we are going to be doing business over the internet, and here's what it means, and here's how the efficiencies happen, and this is how much money you could save, and here's how you can make money. And I've had many C-suite executives tell me, oh, no, the internet will never be reliable. We will never do business on the internet. And so for those that I've helped understand their aha moments in life will change, I could name a bunch of names of people who have done really well. And then there were those that just didn't quite see the light and told me they'll never do business on the internet. And some of them have sort of figured out and still survive today, and some have disappeared. And so that's kind of the aha moment is I try to make things easy for people in a way that they could really either do business, be effective, have fun, that work-life balance thing. In today's world, there really isn't no work-life balance. If you love what you do, you get to do it all the time. So you love what you do, you play with what you do.
That's right. Mr. Levy, it's interesting, to listen to you talk about those individuals that were in your circle for whatever reason years ago, stating that, hey, there was no way that they could do business on the internet. And I would just like to know those individuals, are they still in business? Are they out of business? How have they been able to sustain themselves down through the years?
Well, time has a very interesting thing. Over time, everything becomes washed out or disappears or enhances, depending on how you look at the world. And so a number of those people who said those things at the time have since retired, either because they had to or because their age hit the right level and they retired. A number of them have figured out how to morph into something else, right? And as they figured out what really works for them. And yeah, I could point to people, but I would never say their names publicly, who just never quite caught the bandwagon, right? And so that's a really fascinating. We live in such an amazingly cool time because the technology infrastructure that works among us have changed so dramatically.
Yes, sir.
And the only thing I could absolutely say, if you just for a minute imagine yourself in the world dealing with the transportation industry where transportation was a horse and buggy, right? Where we got around by taking a horse from one place to another, and that's all we had. Now, fast forward 20 years, and all of a sudden, Ford came along, automobiles and trains and everything, the transportation system has dramatically changed. Well, what businesses were you in at the time that you had to transform to something else?
Right.
That transformation is even, I could only say, as broad and as huge as that was, it is nothing compared to where we are now.
Yes, sir. Amazing. Amazing. As I've looked at your website, there are so many different things that you do. Something that you and I mentioned, prior to coming on the air, is that you enable people. This entire concept of thought leadership. Can you discuss that just a little bit with us today?
Yeah, I think this is sort of leads in the direction of what's changed in life. And what's changed is probably the best way I could think about it, if I'm going to put it in one word, it's choice. We have such a significant ability to choose the products or services or service providers that we work with.
Right.
And so that choice comes at a benefit in most cases. It comes at sometimes disadvantage in others. But what it means for the craftsman, the person who was born into a profession, and that profession by definition was the only one. Remember the old butcher, baker, candlestick maker, right? You were born in a town. There was one family that was the butcher. The butcher knew who their clients were. No matter how bad they screwed up, unless it was catastrophic, the butcher had a profession and their family had a profession for their entire life.
Right.
But that doesn't work anymore, right? If you charge too much, or if you're a horrible person, or you're not friendly, or you don't have good customer service, some other butcher's coming along and going to take the business away from you.
That's right.
So what happens when we now have access to the world in terms of people who could service our capabilities and service our needs? A great example is, in the old days as a book publisher, one of the things I've done is I've got 4 different book publishing companies. We've published over 800 titles. So when I first started, I always wanted to make it as inexpensive for the author, or for me as publisher, as possible, so that we could make profit quicker. And so when I think the first graphics person I ever hired, we were paying a whopping, now whopping can be either a lot or a little depending on who's listening, $50 an hour for graphics. Some people will say that's a lot, and some people will say that's a little. And what was interesting is, over time, I then found somebody who also, and this is a U.S.-based person, I found somebody who could also do graphics for us, and they could do it for $25 an hour. And the quality of the content was really good. And I'm like, so I went to the original person. I said, I've got this opportunity, and I like this person. You've been working with him for a little bit. I think I don't want to let you go, but I can't pay you the same amount. Well, I then had that same conversation with an Indian graphics person who was at, I think it was at $10 an hour.
Right.
And then finally I had that conversation again with a Filipino, when I found a Filipino graphics person who was doing it for $4 an hour.
Right.
And it's really hard if you're doing basic things like graphic design, and you're charging 10 times or 20 times amount what other people can charge. It's kind of hard to keep your business going. So you've got to do some added value, something above it. So I will hire and still have graphics people, but I need more than just doing the basic graphics work that I can get somebody for $4 an hour for. So that was a long way of saying, in order to be successful in today's world, if somebody has an issue or a problem, what's the first thing they're going to do? They're either going to go to their friend circle and say, how do you solve this? Or if they have a friend who's already solved it, they're going to say, who have you solved this with and how? Or they're going to hit the proverbial Google and type in, how do you do X, whatever X is. Now, what's going to come up in any of those 3 cases is you'll get the recommendation for the expert who can solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that recommendation is one that says, oh, I've used them before, it makes sense. And you could now, in today's world, you could see video testimonials, you could read testimonials. You'll see, if it's on Amazon, you're seeing their scores of other customers and other write-ups. Exactly. So we are actually becoming a customer-centered world where we actually get to see how the vendors that we're using have treated people who are like us. And what that ultimately means is we as service providers, and by the way, if 80, 90% of the U.S. economy is service provider, you are in one way or another a service provider. So we as service providers need to provide incremental value, and we need to both provide good value, and then we need to, in the first case, we need to actually be found by the people looking for us because we are seen as the expert.
Right.
So now going back to what a thought leader is, a thought leader is the person who can solve your pain point. It's pretty simple, right? It's in the old world, what we used to do is there were these book publishers who would take a resident expert and they would say, hey, you are the person who could solve this problem, and they'd publish their book and they'd make them big, and they were the one person in the United States or the world who could solve that problem. Well, in today's world, we don't need that one person who's the major thought leader. We want the person who understands us personally, understands our personal problems, and can solve our problem. So we want that, whether you call it a thought leader or recognized expert, we want that expert who could solve our problem and do it at a price point we're comfortable with. And so that's the thing we spend energy on. That's the thing that I spend energy on. And it's simply, how can I help any expert who has a pain point and have recognized the pain points their customers have? How do we make sure that expert is recognized by their customers as being able to solve that pain point? And that's where I'm spending my energy.
I appreciate that, Mr. Levy. And you mentioned something earlier that you own 4 different book publishing companies. Did I hear you correctly in that?
Yes, you did.
Okay. So that's a perfect segue for, I guess, for my next question. You know, in terms of you being able to assist someone, you know, an individual who owns, you know, definitely 4 different book publishing companies for years, as you most certainly have. How can someone get started even in writing a book? Let's say that I have an interest myself in writing a book.
And by the way, I should have figured this out ahead of time. Have you written your first book yet?
Not yet.
All right. So first of all,
there's the desire, you know, that's quite honestly eating at me to become a published author.
So do you like Greg or Gregory? What do you like better?
Gregory makes me feel like I'm in trouble.
So Mom used to call you Gregory. I got you.
Call you, you know.
Wait, no. Mom would call you Gregory Wilson, and
right.
Then you knew you were really in trouble.
Right. With the middle initial that remains private. Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. I got you. So Greg, here's the interesting part. What I'd like to say to you is we have I have 4 traditional book publishing companies. I don't think I've done anything that's traditional, but we can publish books which are, 20,000 words to 100,000 words. And we've published for Synopsis, which is I think they're a $1.5 billion EDA company. So we publish all of their books, and we've published, as I mentioned, a little over 800 titles. Now, in looking at what authors do and in looking at how they do things and what's important, I think what happens is, because this concept, this thing called a book, and the ability to be an author has been built up so high that lots of times authors spend so much time and energy in the writing. Because, let's face it, if you've written it, and I'm not talking about you directly, Greg, but right. If you've written it and you've thought it and you thought it was cool, well, by definition, don't we think the entire world's going to love it? And unfortunately, what happens with authors is they think that their content is so amazing that the book is just going to take off by itself without doing any work whatsoever. So the first